Section 7. A man may maintain a strife and combat against sin in himself, and yet be but almost a Christian. So did Balaam when he went to curse the people of God. He had a great strife within himself. How shall I curse, says he, those whom God has not cursed? Or how shall I defy those whom the Lord has not defied? And did not Pilate strive against his sin when he said to the Jews, Shall I crucify your king? What evil has he done? I am innocent of the blood of this just man. Objection. But you will say, Is not this an argument of grace, when there is a striving in the soul against sin? For what should oppose sin in the heart but grace? The apostle makes the lusting of the flesh against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, to be an argument of grace in the heart. Now I find this strife in my heart. Though the remainders of corruption sometimes break out into actual sins, yet I find a striving in my soul against sin. Answer. It is true, there is a striving against sin, which is only from grace and is proper to believers, but there is also a striving against sin which is not from grace, and therefore may be in those who are not true believers. There is a strife against sin in one and the same faculty, the will against the will, the affection against the affection, and this is that which the apostle calls the lusting of the flesh against the spirit, that is, the striving of the unregenerate part against the regenerate. And this is ever in the same faculty, and is proper to believers only. An unbeliever never finds this strife in himself. This strife cannot be in him. It is impossible while he is not in a state of grace. But then there is a striving against sin in diverse faculties, and this is the strife that is in those who are not believers. There, the strife is between the will and the conscience. Conscience, enlightened and terrified with the fear of hell and damnation, then the conscience is against sin. But the will and affections not being renewed, they are for sin, and this causes great tugging and combats many times in the sinner's heart. Thus it was with the scribes and Pharisees. Conscience convinced them of the divinity of Christ and of the truth of his being the Son of God, and yet a perverse will and carnal affections cry out, Crucify him! Crucify him! Conscience pleaded for him. It had a witness in their bosoms, and yet their wills were bent against him. Therefore they are said to have resisted the Spirit, namely the workings and convictions of the Spirit in their consciences. And this is the case of many unconverted sinners, when the will and affections are for sin and plead for it, and conscience is against it, and many times fights the soul away from the doing of it. And hence, men take that which opposes sin in them to be grace, when it is only the work of a natural conscience. They conclude the strife is between grace and sin, the regenerate and unregenerate part, when, alas, it is no other than the contention of a natural conscience against a corrupt will and affections. And if so, then, a man may have great strifes and combats against sin in him, and yet be but almost a Christian. A man may desire grace, and yet be but almost a Christian. So did the 5 foolish virgins. Give us of your oil. What was that but true grace? It was that oil which lighted the wise virgins into the bridegroom's chamber. They did not only desire to enter in, but they desire oil to light them in. Wicked men desire heaven, desire a Christ to save them. There is none so wicked upon earth, but desire to be happy in heaven. But here are those who desire grace as well as glory, and yet these are but almost Christians. Objection. But is it not commonly taught that desires for grace are grace? Nay, does not our Lord Christ make it so? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Answer. It is true that there are some desires of grace which are grace, as 1. When a man desires grace from a right sense of his natural state, when he sees the vileness of sin and the woeful, defiled, and loathsome condition he is in by reason of sin, and therefore desires the grace of Christ to renew and change him, this is true grace. This some make to be the lowest degree of saving faith. 2. When a man joins proportionable endeavors to his desires, does not only wish for grace, but work for grace, such desires are grace. 3. When a man's desires are constant and incessant, which cease not but in the attainment of their object, such desires are true grace. They are part of the special work of the Spirit. They do really partake of the nature of grace. Now it is a known maxim, that which partakes of the nature of the whole is a part of the whole. The fillings of gold are gold. The sea is not more really water than the least drop. The flame is not more really fire than the least spark. But though all true desires for grace are grace, yet all desires for grace are not true. For 1. A man may desire grace, but not for itself, but for somewhat else, not for grace's sake, but for heaven's sake. He does not desire grace that his nature may be changed, his heart renewed, the image of God stamped upon him, and his lusts subdued in him. These are blessed desires, found only in true believers. The true Christian only can desire grace for grace's sake, but the almost Christian may desire grace for heaven's sake. 2. A man may desire grace without proportionable endeavors after grace. Many are good at wishing, but bad at working, like him who reposed in the grass on a summer's day, crying out, "Oh, that this were to work!" Solomon says, "The desire of the slothful kills him." How so? For his hands refuse to labor. He perishes with all his good desires. The believer joins desires and endeavors together. One thing have I desired of the Lord, and that will I seek after. 3. A man's desires of grace may be unseasonable. Thus, the foolish virgins desired oil when it was too late. The believer's desires are seasonable. He desires grace in the season of grace and seeks grace in a time when it may be found. The wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. He knows his season and has wisdom to improve it. The silly sinner does all his works out of season. He sends away the seasons of grace and then desires grace when the season is over. The sinner does all too late, as Esau desired the blessing when it was too late, and therefore he lost it. Whereas, had he come sooner, he would have obtained it. Most men are wise too late. They come when the market is closed. When the shop is closed, then they have their oil to get. When they lie upon their deathbeds, then they desire holy hearts. 4. Desires of grace in many are very inconstant and fleeting, like the morning dew which quickly passes away, or like Jonah's gourd which springs up in a night and withers in a night. They have no root in the heart and therefore quickly perish. Now if a man may desire grace, but not for grace's sake, if desires may be without endeavors, if a man may desire grace when it is too late, if these desires may be but fleeting and inconstant, then may a man desire grace and yet be but almost a Christian. A man may tremble at the word of God and yet be but almost a Christian, as Belshazzar trembled at the handwriting upon the wall. Objection. But is not that a note of sincerity and truth of grace, to tremble at the word? Does not God say, "I will look favorably on this kind of person, one who is humble, submissive in spirit, and who trembles at my word"? Answer. There is a twofold trembling. 1. One is, when the word discovers the guilt of sin and the wrath of God which that guilt brings, this, where conscience is awake, causes trembling and astonishment. Thus, when Paul preached of righteousness and judgment, it is said that Felix trembled. 2. There is a trembling which arises from a holy dread and reverence of the majesty of God speaking in his word. This is only found in true believers, and is that which keeps the soul low in its own eyes. Therefore, mark how the words run. I will look favorably on this kind of person, one who is humble, submissive in spirit, and who trembles at my word. God does not make the promise merely to him who trembles at the word, for the devils believe and tremble. The word of God can make the proudest, stoutest sinner in the world to shake and tremble, but it is to the one who is humble, submissive in spirit, and who trembles at my word. Where trembling is the fruit of a spirit broken for sin and humble in its own eyes, there will God look. Now many tremble at the word, but not from poverty of spirit, not from a heart broken for sin and low in its own eyes, not from a sense of the majesty and holiness of God, and therefore, notwithstanding, they tremble at the word, yet they are but almost Christians. 3. A man may delight in the word and ordinances of God, and yet be but almost a Christian. They take delight in approaching to God, and it is said of that ground that it received the word with joy, and yet it was but stony ground. Objection. But is it not made a character of a godly man to delight in the word of God? Does not David say, "He is a blessed man who delights in the law of the Lord"? Answer. There is a delighting in the word which flows from grace, and is a proof of blessedness. 1. He who delights in the word because of its spirituality, he is a Christian indeed. The more spiritual the ordinances are, the more does a gracious heart delight in them. 2. When the word comes close to the conscience, rips up the heart, and discovers sin, and yet the soul delights in it notwithstanding, this is a sign of grace. 3. When delight arises from communion with God, this is from a principle of grace in the soul. But there may be a delight in the word where there is no grace. 1. There are many who delight in the word because of the eloquence of the preacher. They delight not so much in the truths delivered as in the dress in which they are delivered. Thus it is said of the prophet Ezekiel, "You are very entertaining to them, like someone who sings love songs with a beautiful voice or plays fine music on an instrument. They hear what you say, but they don't do it." 2. There are very many who delight to hear the word, that yet take no delight to do it. So says God of them, "They delight to hear my words, but they do them not." Now then, if a man may delight in the word more because of the eloquence of the preacher than because of the spirituality of the matter, if he may delight to hear the word and yet not delight to do it, then he may delight in the word and yet be but almost a Christian. Section 8. A man may be a member of a Christian church. He may join himself to the people of God, partake with them in all ordinances, and share of all church privileges, and yet be but almost a Christian. So the 5 foolish virgins joined themselves to the wise and walked together. Many may be members of the church of Christ, and yet not members of Christ, the head of the church. There was a mixed multitude which came up with the church of Israel out of Egypt. They joined themselves to the Israelites, owned their God, left their own country, and yet were Egyptians in heart notwithstanding. All are not Israel that are of Israel. The church in all ages has had unsound members. Cain had communion with Abel, Ishmael dwelt in the same house with Isaac, Judas was in fellowship with the apostles, and so was Demas with the rest of the disciples. There will be some tares in the finest wheat, and it will be so until the harvest. The dragnet of the gospel catches bad fish as well as good. God has a church where there are no members, but such are true members of Christ. But it is in heaven. It is the church of the firstborn. There are no hypocrites, nor rotten, unsound professors, none but the spirits of just men made perfect. All is pure wheat, what God lays up in the garner. There the chaff is separated to unquenchable fire. But in the church on earth, the wheat and the chaff lie in the same heap together. The Samaritans will be near of kin to the Jews when they are in prosperity, so while the church of God flourishes in the world, many will join to it. They will seem Jews, though they are Samaritans, and seem saints, though yet they are no better than almost Christians. Section 9. A man may have great hopes of heaven, great hopes of being saved, and yet be but almost a Christian. Indeed, there is a hope of heaven which is the anchor of the soul, sure and steadfast. It never miscarries, and it is known by 4 properties. First, it is a hope which purifies the heart and purges out sin. He who has this hope purifies himself even as God is pure. That soul that truly hopes to enjoy God truly endeavors to be like God. Secondly, it is a hope which fills the heart with gladness. We rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. Thirdly, it is a hope that is founded upon the promise, as there can be no true faith without a promise, so nor any true hope. Faith applies the promise, and hope expects the fulfilling of the promise. Faith relies upon the truth of it, and hope waits for the good of it. Fourthly, it is a hope that is wrought by God himself in the soul, who is therefore called the God of hope, as being the author as well as the object of hope. Now he who has this hope shall never miscarry. This is a right hope, the hope of the true believer, Christ in you, the hope of glory. But then, as there is a true and sound hope, so there is a false and rotten hope, and this is much more common, as bastard pearls are more frequently worn than true pearls. There is nothing more common than to see men big with groundless hopes of heaven, as 1. A man may have great hope of heaven, who has no true grace. You read of the hope of hypocrites. The performance of duties is a proof of their hope. The foolish virgins would never have done what they did had they thought they should have been shut out after all. Many professors would not be at such pains and duties as they are if they did not hope for heaven. Hope is the great motive to action. Despair cuts the sinews of all endeavors. That is one reason why the damned in hell cease acting toward an alteration of their state, because despair has taken hold of them. If there were any hope in hell, they would up and be doing there. So that there may be great hope where there is no grace. Experience proves this. Formal professors are men of no grace, but yet men of great hopes. Nay, many times you shall find that none fear more about their eternal condition than those who have most cause of hope. and none hope more than those who have most cause of fear. 2. A man may hope in the mercy and goodness and power of God without eyeing the promise, and this is the hope of most. God is full of mercy and goodness, and therefore willing to save, and he is infinite in power and therefore able to save. Why, therefore, should I not rest on him? Now, it is presumption, and therefore sin, to hope in the mercy of God, otherwise than by eyeing the promise, for the promise is the channel of mercy through which it is conveyed. All the blessedness the saints enjoy in heaven is no other than what is the fruit of promise relied on and hoped for here on earth. A man has no warrant to hope in God, but by virtue of the promise. 3. A man may hope for heaven and yet not cleanse his heart, nor depart from his secret sins. That hope of salvation that is not accompanied with heart purification is a vain hope. 4. A man may hope for heaven and yet be doing the work of hell. He may hope for salvation and yet be working out his own damnation and so perish in his confidences. This is the case of many, like the rower who looks one way and rows another. Many have their eyes on heaven, whose hearts are in the earth. They hope in God, but choose him not for a portion. They hope in God, but do not love him as the best good, and therefore will have no portion in him, nor good by him, but will perish without him, notwithstanding all their hopes. What is the hope of the hypocrite, though he has gained, when God takes away his soul? Now then, if a man may have great hope of heaven who has no grace, if he may hope in mercy without eyeing the promise, if he may hope without heart purifying, if he may hope for heaven and yet do the work of hell, surely then a man may have great hopes of heaven and yet be but almost a Christian. Section 10. A man may be under great and visible changes, and these wrought by the ministry of the word, and yet be but almost a Christian. As Herod was. It is said, when he heard John the Baptist, he did many things and heard him gladly. Saul was under a great change when he met the Lord's prophets. He turned prophet too. Nay, it is said that God gave him another heart. Now, was not this a work of grace? And was not Saul here truly converted? One would think he was, but yet indeed he was not. For though it is said God gave him another heart, yet it is not said that God gave him a new heart. There is a great difference between another heart and a new heart. God gave him another heart to fit him for a ruler, but gave him not a new heart to make him a believer. Another heart may make another man, but it is a new heart that makes a new man. Again, Simon Magus is a great proof of this truth. He was under a great and visible change. Of a sorcerer, he was turned to be a believer. He left his witchcrafts and sorceries and embraced the gospel. Was not this a great change? If the drunkard does but leave his drunkenness, the swearer his oaths, and the profane person his profaneness, they think this is a gracious change, and their state is now good. Alas, Simon Magus did not only leave his sins, but had a kind of conversion, for he believed and was baptized. Objection. But is not that man who is changed a true Christian? Answer. Not every change makes a man a Christian. Indeed, there is a change that whoever is under it is a true Christian. When a man's heart is so changed as that it is renewed, when old things are done away and all is become new, when the new creature is wrought in the soul, when a man is turned from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, when the man is enlightened, the will renewed, the affections made heavenly, then a man is a Christian indeed. But you must know that every change is not this change. For 1. There is a civil change, a moral change, as well as a spiritual and supernatural change. Many men are changed in a moral sense, and one may say they are become new men, but they are in heart and nature the same men still. They are not changed in a spiritual and supernatural sense, and therefore it cannot be said of them that they have become new creatures. Restraining grace may cause a moral change, but it is renewing grace which must cause a saving change. Now many are under restrainable grace, and so changed morally that they are not under the power of saving grace, and so changed savingly. 2. There is an outward change as well as an inward change. The outward change is often without the inward, though the inward change is never without the outward. A man's heart cannot be sanctified, but it will influence the life. But a man's life may be reformed and yet never affect or influence the heart. 3. A man may be converted from a course of profaneness to a form of godliness, from a filthy lifestyle to a fair profession, and yet the heart be the same in one and the other. A rotten post may be painted without and yet unsound within. It is common to have the outside of the cup and platter made clean, and yet the inside foul and filthy. Now then, if a man may be changed morally and yet not spiritually, outwardly and yet not inwardly, from a course of profaneness to a lifeless form of godliness, then a man may be under great and visible changes and yet be no more than almost a Christian. I do not speak this to discountenance any change short of that which is spiritual, but to awaken you to seek after that change which is more than moral. It is good to be outwardly renewed, but it is better to be savingly renewed. I know how natural it is for men to take up with anything like a work of conversion, though it be not conversion, and resting in that, they eternally perish. Beloved, let me tell you, there is no change, no conversion can stead your souls in the day of judgment on this side that saving work which is wrought on the soul by the Spirit of God, renewing you throughout. The sober man, without this change, shall as surely go to hell as the foolish drunkard. Morality and civility may commend us to men, but not to God. They are of no value in the procurement of eternal salvation. A man may go far in an outward change, and yet be not one step nearer heaven than he who has never under any change. Nay, he may be, in some sense, further off. As Christ says, the scribes and Pharisees were further from heaven with all their show of godliness than publicans and harlots in all their sin and immorality. Because resting in a false work, a partial change, we neglect to seek after a true and saving change. There is nothing more common than to mistake our state, and by proud thoughts misjudge our condition, and so perish in our own delusions. The world is full of these foolish builders who lay the foundation of their hopes of eternal salvation upon the sand. Now, my brethren, would you not mistake the way to heaven and perish in a delusion? Would you not be found fools at last? For none are such fools as the spiritual fool, who is a fool in the great business of salvation. Would you not be fools for your souls and for eternity? Oh, then labor after and pray for a thorough work of conversion. Beg of God that he would make a saving change in your souls, that you may be altogether Christians. All other changes below this saving change, this heart change, make us but almost Christians.